Now, let's spend some time in terms of understanding what we mean by revenue. What are the different forms of revenue? We always talk about a few things like the total revenue, we talk about average revenue, and we also talk about marginal revenue. So, what are each one of them? And how does this revenue play a decision or how does it play a role in terms of economics, something which we will try to understand. Now, whenever we are dealing with different forms of revenue, first one is total revenue. So whatever is the total earning for a particular firm based on the number of goods it has sold. For every good that it has sold, what is the total earning that the firm has got during a specific time period. So if it has, let's say, charged some P for each of the items and it has sold Q such items, I say that the total revenue for the firm is the price multiplied by the quantity. So it's the total earning the firm has got just by selling its goods and services during a particular period of time. And when I'm looking at the total revenue divided by the total quantity that it has sold, which is nothing but the average revenue, and if the pricing is uniform, then even that would be equal to the price also. So average revenue is the amount for each good on an average for each good that is sold. What is the earning of the particular company? That's the reason we find the average revenue as total revenue by the total quantity that is sold. But here, because earlier we have made price times quantity as total revenue, this statement is made under the assumption that the price is uniform for all the products, for all the quantity that is sold. If that is the case, price is also equal to total revenue by quantity. So average revenue will be equal to price if the price that you are charging for all the customers is one and the same. So in that case, your average revenue is nothing but the price. That's the reason we talk about when there is a uniformity in the price, nothing high, nothing low kind of mechanism, then whatever is your average revenue will be same as that of the price also, which means average revenue will be the same as your demand curve. So that's one interesting point that we have to understand regarding the average revenue. Similarly, another term which we need to be more comfortable with is the marginal revenue. Marginal revenue is basically, okay, right now let's say I have produced 30 goods, I have sold 30 goods and I have got 125 bucks for selling those 30. Now I have sold the 31st item and my total revenue has become 128, which means the marginal revenue is nothing but the extra revenue that I have got, the increase in the total revenue that I have got by selling one additional unit of the good. So in this case, 3 will be my marginal revenue. And traditionally, whenever I am talking about the total revenue as in an equation form, it is nothing but when I am finding out the derivative of the total revenue is what is going to give me the marginal revenue, because for one unit the derivative of the total revenue with respect to the quantity is what is giving me the marginal revenue. Understanding of these three forms of revenue is very much necessary, because we will be seeing at the patterns in the total revenue under different conditions. Now, Here, the two things which I would like to look at with respect to revenues. One, where the price is not affected by the firm's output, means even if the firm is producing 20 units or 100 units, each unit will be sold at the same price, right? Irrespective of the quantity that it is producing. Because see, in some cases what happens, if I have to sell more and more, I may have to decrease the price. Initial first few products I may sell it at a high price, but if my intention is to sell more and more products, I may have to decrease the price. I may have to give some kind of discount. So whereas on some side, even if you say, even if you sell 20 units or 100 units, the pricing remains the same. So here right now we are looking at a situation where the price is not affected by the output that you are producing and selling. In that case, we call that particular firms as price takers. They are not price makers. They cannot set the price. They take the price, they accept the price which is determined by the supply and the demand. So the equilibrium price that comes out based on the demand curve and the supply curve interaction, supply curve and the demand curve intersection is what is the price, and every firm in the industry has to accept that particular price itself and charge that same price. If they are charging anything less than that, they may get a market, they may get huge market, huge number of customers, but they will not make any much profit. It may not be feasible for them. But on the other side, if they are charging slightly more than that particular price, they may lose their customers very badly and they may be out of business as well. Which means what I could clearly talk about is, in an environment where a firm is a price taker, it does not control the price. It has to accept the price which the industry is going with. And generally in this kind of market, we see majorly small firms whose market share is very, very less. So they don't control the price, right? So whatever they want to sell, they may want to sell 20 units or 100 units. Whatever they produce, they can sell only at the market price. They cannot influence the price at all. So because the price is the same, if I look at plotting a price versus the output curve for them, the price is a horizontal line across. Now because price is same for all the customers, the demand curve is perfectly elastic. So the same price curve is what is my demand curve, which is perfectly elastic. And in this case, as I have discussed earlier, if the price that is charged is uniform for all the customers, then the price is the same as average revenue. And if everyone is charged highest, so the next unit also I can sell at the same price, means the same would be your marginal revenue as well. So which means across, in a typical scenario where a firm is a price taker, I see this relationship where the demand is always equal to the average revenue, which is always equal to marginal revenue, which means in this kind of a situation, the total revenue keeps increasing linearly itself, because it's just the same increase by same P every period. For every extra unit that I am selling, I am getting my total revenue increased by an amount of P. Nothing different. There is no volume based discount. I don't need to decrease the price. So this is what happens in a price taker scenario. Later on we will try to see this kind of markets. We call them as perfectly competitive kind of markets, where the company cannot set the price. It is a price taker. And if you see the price that it is going, where the demand and supply curves intersect, for the industry, that quantity is an optimal quantity to produce, and that price is the price that it should set. So the whole industry will produce this much quantity, and of course it can be distributed by different firms, but all of them charging the same price. So in this kind of a scenario, we see that the average revenue, the marginal revenue, they are all similar. They should be equal to the market price, and the demand curve is also perfectly horizontal, which means it's a perfectly elastic demand curve. So some of the characteristics which we need to understand regarding the revenue curve, especially when the price is not affected by the quantity of output that the firm is producing and selling. Whereas on the other side, let's look at a slightly different dimension where the company is a price maker, means it can set its price. So it can really try selling the first few units at a very high price, and if it is having an intention to sell something more, it may very much reduce the price. So in this case, we see that the firms will really have the ability to influence the price. So they may sell more units by reducing the price, and if they choose that no, they don't want to reduce the price, they may end up selling very few units also. Which means traditionally what you could see is as the quantity is increasing, the price has to come down. Which means you see that the demand curve has to be downward sloping itself. And if the demand curve is downward sloping, again, the average revenue curve also will be downward sloping. Here, in this case, average revenue will not be equal to price, right? But average revenue curve is same as the demand curve, which would be downward sloping. And if you look at, so this is where you see the average revenue or the demand curve, which is becoming more and more downward sloping. As the number of quantity is increasing, I have the demand typically goes down, and the only way you can attract people, go for higher quantity is by reducing the price itself. Now, if the average revenue is falling, obviously we know that the marginal revenue should fall even more further. Probably if you see, okay, for 10 units, let's say I have got 120, means average revenue is around 12. But for the 11th unit, let's say for 11 units together, I have got only 125. This is where you see that the average revenue here will become 11.4, whereas the marginal revenue is just 5. So marginal revenue has to fall much faster compared to that of the average revenue. So that's the reason you see that the marginal revenue curve will slope downward, but much steeper compared to the average revenue curve. A very typical thing that we see in case of a regular price maker kind of scenarios. The average revenue curve slopes downward, which will be the same as the demand curve. The marginal revenue curve slopes even more downward, more steeper than the average revenue curve. And there is a possibility that the marginal revenue can even go negative, as we are seeing here. After a certain quantity, the marginal revenue will go negative. Which means if I am producing one more additional good and selling, the revenue, the additional revenue which I get out of it could be completely negative. And few interesting things that come out. If the price elasticity of demand is less than -1, which means if my good is more and more elastic, right? Look at it. The modulus of price elasticity of demand, let's say, is greater than 1. What does this mean? The good is more and more elastic. Means you reduce the price a little bit, the quantity produced will increase drastically. So price is changed little bit, quantity is increased drastically. So the total revenue also will increase drastically. So the total revenue will increase drastically is an indicator that the marginal revenue will be very much positive. So wherever the curve is, the good is more and more elastic. Typically we know from elasticity concept, typically at the higher prices, we see that it is more and more elastic. So at that case, you see that marginal revenue is positive. And if you look at inelastic, relatively inelastic kind of scenario, I see that the elasticity will lie between -1 and 0. In that case, probably even if the price is decreased a little bit, the quantity will increase only by a little bit, which means the overall revenue is going to be lesser. Overall revenue is going down means marginal revenue has to be negative only. So in that case, the marginal revenue will become more and more negative, especially in the inelastic range. So towards the lower side of the demand curve is where we are calling as inelastic, and in that particular range, we see that the marginal revenue will be negative. And at least at a unit elastic kind of scenario, where we see that whatever is the percentage decrease in the price, there is an equivalent percentage increase in the quantity, overall resulting in total revenue not changing. Total revenue not changing means the marginal revenue should be equal to 0. So this is one relationship which we need to be comfortable with, especially the scenario where the price changes with the output. And that's the reason you see, as long as the good is elastic, the total revenue keeps increasing with the output. And when the elasticity is becoming 1, the total revenue is flat because marginal revenue is 0. And once the good is moving into the inelastic zone, the marginal revenue is becoming negative, which means the total revenue is actually falling in that rate. So a clear understanding of this pattern, a clear understanding of the shape of the average revenue curve, marginal revenue curve, and the total revenue curve. In case of price maker or price chooser, we really need to be comfortable with. And just as a quick note, see the revenue curve, probably as the price is changing, the output also will change, right? As the price is changing, now if you see, as the price is changing, the quantity will change, and based on that, the total revenue. Now, probably if I look at it, let's say this is my total revenue curve, right? Now the price has increased, so obviously quantity could decrease. So once the quantity has decreased, earlier let's say this was the total revenue, now the quantity has decreased, which will result in this being the total revenue. Now whenever I'm talking about a price change resulting in the output change and then a total revenue change, we are looking at it as a movement along the total revenue curve. But if there is any other factor, the customer taste changing, any demand changing altogether, the demand changing altogether, because the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity will change. In that case, we are talking about a shift in the demand curve, a shift in the revenue curve itself for all prices. So wherever there is any change in the demand apart from the price, we see that the total revenue curve will change. Correspondingly, your average revenue curve, which is equivalent to the demand curve is shifting. So average revenue curve has to shift. Average revenue curve shifts, marginal revenue curve has to shift. Marginal revenue curve shifting, the total revenue curve has to shift. So we really need to understand whether the change in the revenue is because of movement along the revenue curve or a shift in the revenue curve. So this basic understanding of the concept of the revenues and three forms of revenues and how the revenue curve behaves under different circumstances of price, we really need to understand and appreciate. All right.